Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Rabbi Winston's Geula and Redemption Thursdays. I'm Yehuda Shamroth, usually from Ramat Beit Shemesh, but today we are broadcasting from downtown Jerusalem at Cinema City Nefesh B'Nefesh Center. And if I turn around, maybe you can see the beautiful skyline. It's a little bit dark, but okay. Anyway, we're here tonight doing all kinds of wonderful things in Jerusalem. You should join us. And tonight we're very excited to hear Rabbi Winston, as usual, discuss the Geula Shalema and how he can use his sources, his multiple sources of sorry, I'm trying to get my mind straight here. His own teachings, of course, and taken from Kabbalistic sources and from deep teachings of all the different Gemaras and everything he shares with us about what to do, preparing us for the end of days. And today's topic is no different. It's a little bit more specific. He's teaching us how to prepare specifically for the Geula. And Rabbi Winston, please don't forget to check his website, by the way, Chardon Productions. You can see it down there underneath. I can say it correctly because it's too small for me to see. But the Rabbi, please tell us your website. And without further ado, I'm going to let Rabbi take over. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. A lot of times the books that I write are really for myself. I didn't write the books for myself, but they're ideas that I was thinking about working on, and I had questions, and I looking for answers, always to try to understand the bigger picture, what Hashem wants from us, what we could be doing to expedite the redemption. Originally, that was not my kivun. That was not the direction that I began with. The beginning, I was more interested in just sharing the words of Chazal and what was in the Gemara for people who didn't have that type of background, who use the wisdom in everyday life and wouldn't necessarily see it otherwise. But there were so many sources. As time went on, I began to see, things that made it almost impossible, because going to yeshiva never came up. No one talked about redemption that much at all. No one spoke about Mashiach that much at all. It was learning and halacha and Shabbos and kashrus and etc. So many different things, and it was very, it was very normal. That's what it was. But you got the impression that there wasn't much to talk about. There wasn't redemption to talk about. There wasn't Mashiach to talk about. There were groups that obviously were doing things like that, especially while the Rebbe was still alive. Chabad was very much into that. Other groups perhaps that I'm aware of, but the Ashkenazi literature world basically not so much, partly to do with what's happened in the past, the whole debacle with Shabbatai Tzvi back in the 1600s and kind of spilled over. But I think between survival and keeping Torah alive and making sure that people knew halacha, especially after the Holocaust, because that just literally put a gaping hole in the Torah world. And the future leaders were wiped away, and all of a sudden we found ourselves in a situation of crisis that we had experienced for a long time. And the focus became rebuilding the Torah world as much as possible, to teach Torah, to quickly raise up leaders, both in terms of hashkafa and primarily halacha, poskim, because we need poskim. These are people who decide the halacha in situations that are new, that come up, that didn't, that are based upon old principles, but the situation itself is new. I don't think Moshe Rabbeinu was told about light bulbs on Har Sinai. Could have been, but it's not recorded anywhere, and certainly had to be dealt with later on, and all the other situations of halacha that came up because of technology and advancing society, and new situations that are arising. But in any case, after the Holocaust, the main focus was on the meat and potatoes of Torah Judaism, and that is the things that we need to deal with on a daily basis, because people have to know the material in order to make decisions and lead the people. So things that were extraneous, seemingly extraneous, were pushed aside for the time being, and I guess over time, the people began to become more aware of these things as we began to relax, because we had done a remarkable job. Obviously, all with Siyata D'Shmaya, that we were able to develop communities and restore a lot that had been lost. And you could never get back what was lost, but at least to patch over the situation. And then people began, I remember in the beginning, almost no one called the Zohar. A rabbi would get up to give a drush to the yeshiva or someplace in public, and the Zohar was almost never mentioned, except in the circles where they learned it. I'm talking Ashkenazim. Sephardim, they never stopped learning and talking about the Zohar. That's their hashkafa source the entire time. But in the literature world, that wasn't that way. And then more towards the last, let's say, 10, 15, 20 years, began to re-enter once again. It's all divine prophets. It's all directed from Shemaim. It's all God. It's what he wants. It's the way things are meant to work for whatever reason. We will discuss those things and have discussed those things in the past and moving forward. But the eye-opening thing was seeing how much Chazal talked about these things, talked about these issues. They were central. And not just because the Romans were constantly on their case and there was always threats of anti-Semitism wherever they went. We had some golden eras and we knew how to deal with them for the most part. And it was just an important thing because, as we said before, that when it comes to the Jewish people, there's only two modes. There's Galus and Geula, either exile or redemption. We're either going towards exile, we're going towards redemption. It'd be nice if we could just stay in the redemption mode the entire time. That's not going to happen until Mashiach comes, because as long as there is a Yetzer Hara, and there is one, clearly, we're always going to be dropping off. We're always, you can reach an epiphany, you can reach tremendous heights and levels and realizations. But, even Bali Tshuva, you talked to a lot of Bali Tshuva and how excited they were when they first became religious, but as they began to settle in, they started to absorb and take on a lot of the habits of things people have been doing for all their lives, but it's not exactly the way we're supposed to be. The heart that was there in the beginning starts to dissipate as time, and to maintain it, and that's just normal. Because in order to be able to maintain any sense of excitement, it's a daily effort. And this is what Rashi brings down in Chumash, that Hashem says, the Torah that you received this day. And Chazal learn out that every day you have to act as if today you received the Torah, meaning that the excitement and the newness that it had at the beginning, that has to be there every day. And that's an act of will, an ongoing act of will. When there are people who love their jobs, as they say, anyone who loves their jobs never works a day in their life because they love their job. So every day that they go to work, they look forward to it, and they have a difficult time shutting down on Friday because they love what they do. And that's the way it has to be Torah mitzvahs, but there's a big difference, a huge difference. And that is, when it comes to your job, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be a better person. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to improve your relationship with Kodesh Baruch Hu. It's a job, and you like what you do, right? But when it comes to Torah mitzvahs, we're talking about things that, by definition, go against the Yetzer Hara. They instigate it, and they make it difficult, and it's an ongoing battle. This is what the Ramchal says in Derech Hashem and Mesos Hashem, that, and Das Tfuna for that matter, that all day long, every day of the week, there's an ongoing battle between the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. And anybody who doesn't feel that battle, he says, well, that means I won, right? No, more than likely means you lost. More than likely means you lost. Because until a person gets old and they no longer have the courage, even still there's a Yetzer Hara, until a person dies, right? That's when the Yetzer Hara is finally gone from a person. They talk about people like Yitzchak Avinu and David HaMelech who defeated the Yetzer Hara, but I think that for the most part, when it says they defeated it, it doesn't mean they got rid of it. It doesn't mean that it stopped functioning, because then there would be no reason to live. It means they knew how to work with it. They knew how to channel it. An example that I've used in the past, one of my favorites, I don't have a lot of them, but this one is specifically, right on the, hits the nail in the head. As a Chavetz Chaim once got up, in his 80s, he got up early as he did every morning, and his Yetzer Hara said to him, you're an old man, you've been doing this for a long time. Surely at this stage of your life, you're able to sleep in. Why get up so early? And his answer back was, if you're up this early, there's no reason why I shouldn't be up this early. Now, if you'd been there in the same room, I'm not sure you would have heard this conversation. I don't think it was one that was actually verbalized. Could be, but I don't think so. Rather, Gilu. It's as if that's what the dialogue was. You get up in the morning, you feel a little sluggish, you don't want to get out of bed in the morning, right? You feel like sleeping in, maybe for the first time, after a long time getting up early. And you're struggling. Some people just go right back to bed. They listen to that koyach. They fall prey to it. And other people say, look, if I'm already having this struggle, I remember I used to have a chavrusa, when I was back in Toronto, And in the wintertime, the sun rises very late, like almost 8 o'clock sometimes. And getting out of bed on a cold morning when it's still dark outside, in me chavrusa, it's an act of will. There's no question about that. But I like my chavrusa, and I like doing it. But the one day, it was a struggle. It's always a struggle. One day he missed for whatever reason. And then the next day, even though he was supposed to be there, I felt like, he wasn't there yesterday, so certainly I'm allowed to miss a day too. He feels, and the struggle would go on inside my head. And at some point in time, I had to get up anyhow, because the back and forth going on, it's get up, don't get up, get up, don't get up, was so loud, so to speak, that I couldn't sleep anyhow. I couldn't fall back asleep, so I just got up instead and went. This is what life is about. Now, I'm veering a little off topic right now, but it's all part of the same idea. It says in Shar HaGilgulim, right, which is the quintessential work on the topic of reincarnation from the Arizal, filled with tremendous insights about how the soul works and how tikkun works and history itself as a function of all of this. It's tremendous work. And he mentions in there, in one of the chapter 23, I believe it's called Chibur Kever, or actually has no name. They're all called introductions. But introduction number 23, in there, the topic is Chibur Kever. Chibur Kever literally is the beating in the grave. And the way he describes it is that 4 angels, after a person dies, 4 angels come down and they dig out the grave. So it's like there's room to stand vertically. I don't think physical. I think, spiritually. I think it's more, I've never opened up a grave, and I've never heard about people who have to check and see if this was the case, but I assume it's not physical. And they bring the soul and body back together again. And so, on some way, some level, this takes place. And there's a Rizal. Rizal says it. We take it as fact. We don't take it as as just a mashal, unless he says it's a mashal. And he says that the angels ask you one question, just one question. It's not Yom Adin. It's not the day of judgment. They just ask you, what is your shem b'tumah? So, because apparently you get 2 names at birth. One that your parents give you, which is with Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration, even though they're not religious. Because the name that you get, your Hebrew name, is not just your name, but it is the description of your soul. Each letter is a concept, and each name is a collection of concepts that make a specific reality who you are. What's a Shem B'tumah? Well, that's your impure name. Who gives it to you? The truth is you're born with it. And it actually comes back to the sin of Adam Arishon back in Gan Eden. And when after he did, the chet, the sin, says all the souls of mankind were inside of him, they all fell off into the reality of spiritual impurity. And that's where we come from. Before we come into this world, before we finally, become incarnated in a body in this world, we exist as a soul, and we start off in that spiritual reality, and we actually get our own personal klip, our own personal, yetzer hara. And it sticks with us. Even after we get out of there and we go into a body, it stays with us. And that becomes our struggle. That becomes our tendency. Now, the way that the Yetzer is described, it seems that really it's physical instinct. Bodily instinct. And everyone has different instincts. Some people for food, some people for sleep, some for both. So we all have different weaknesses in life, and that's your klipa, that's your yetzer hara, and it's an instinct, right? Because it ends up becoming bad because the body doesn't have the type of discretion to know when everything it wants, whether it's justified or not, whether it's right or not, whether it's morally correct or not. So that's why so many people today just grab and take what they want, thinking if I want it, I should have it. But that's not the way it works in life. And as a result of that, people end up living very morally decrepit lives. But a person, who understands this idea, they understand that this weakness, because people say, well, that's my strength. This is my weakness. Everyone got weaknesses, so here's my weakness, right? But the truth is that we're here to fix the weakness itself. So when a person comes into this world, the whole point of Torah is tikkun. Tikkun olam, tikkun prati of the person himself. Tikkun, how to rectify, elevate, fix, purify, in order to prepare ourselves for the world to come. And by learning Torah and performing the mitzvahs with the proper intention, it's all custom designed to facilitate that type of spiritual growth. That's the idea. So it says that when they come and they ask this person their shame betuma, they're really saying to the person, what was your Yetzer Hara that you had to struggle with the most during your lifetime? And most people won't have the answer. They won't know. And because of that, it says they pick him up like a dirty towel and they shake him out till he's finally pure and clean, which is not, it's a form of suffering. Initial suffering before the Yom Adin and the final suffering. Because even in the world to come, everything's refinement. It's all refinement. In preparation for the ultimate levels of the world to come. And the tzaddikim, though, they have it at their fingertips. They know right away. And so for them, there's not much chibur kever anymore at that point in time. They're able to move to the next level without much suffering because they didn't, in fact, work on their Yetzer Hara during their lifetime. That's what we're here to do. But as long as the Yetzer Hara, people, if you're not constantly working on it, if you're not constantly dealing with it, which is what Torah does, Torah mitzvahs, it's like a crisis. Every mitzvah you have to do, as long as you're not doing it as if it's the most automatic thing around, an autopilot, and you're trying to do it with kavanah, like every time you come to daven, for example, now you see that people get used to davening. They do it a certain way, the same way every single day, because that's what's comfortable for them. They don't want to necessarily be there. They have to be there. And so they do it in a way that's comfortable for them. There's other people who understand it's one of the most fantastic opportunities. You would never talk to your CEO of the company like that. You wouldn't treat him like, I saw you yesterday. You wouldn't do that. It's like you give him the attention, like this is the first time you're meeting him, and give him all the cover. But talking to God, you get used to it. You can't see him. You don't really believe he's going to punish you. You don't believe he's going to cut you off. So therefore, I punch in and punch out. But to maintain a sense of kavanah every day, 3 times a day, and among that, putting on her tefillin with kavanah too, and with an appreciation of what the mitzvah is, etc., etc. I was just thinking today, and this is a leap. This is a leap, and I'm not sure I even can say a thing like this, but you have to wonder. Right now, there's tremendous pressure on the Shiva world because we're about to have a major confrontation. It's bad for the secular because every time they do this, they always end up having a war or suffering some other way. But they don't know that. They don't believe it. They don't know it. But for us, it becomes a real headache because we have to protest against it, and some people go to jail because of it. Some people do end up in the army, but they want these shivas basically to empty out and put these people into the army. Torah is not important to them. It's not real to them. But everything's hashgacha pratis. They're not doing it. They're just the means to do it. They're just the instrument to do it. God's doing it. So why would God do a thing like that? I don't know. I mean, we know at the end of days, the chaos reigns. We know that the Torah world becomes despised, and we're supposed to be the carriers of truth, and truth is not a valuable commodity today in the world. So if anyone tries to push truth, ends up being on the other side and the bad guy. But again, this is me. This is my own personal opinion, and I don't know that I'm right, but I have to wonder, at least wonder, because we started saying Tehillim after davening, in the yeshivas and the shuls on October 7th, when the situation began. And we've been saying 2 Kipputot Tehillim, 2 chapters of Tehillim, same ones pretty much, some say a little bit different, every day after each davening, except on Shabbos and Yantav, and some even say it then as well, but at least every weekday we've been saying it. And it's hard. It's hard to maintain the kavanah, but so often you look around and it's, again, perfunctory. The soul's gone from it. The heart's gone from it. Hutner speaks about this. He talks about how you can be yotzi the mitzvah by simply carrying out the act itself. But without the heart, you've killed it. That's it. You killed the mitzvah, right? And the same thing. The moment the crisis began and the rockets are flying overhead, you looked around and you just listen. You can hear the people's sincerity. As time goes on, they're still chatufim. There's still people who are hostages, haven't got back yet. Situation worse and worse by the day. There's still war going on. Anti-Semitism is increasing around the world. And now, of course, we're back to fighting internally inside the country itself, and they're coming up. But you look around and you watch people talk during the Tehillim. Some people don't say it, but they race through it, And it's you want to say you understand that there are people right now in Gaza who are fighting for you. They're putting their lives on the line for you. They're the ones who are in the army. You don't want to be there. Fine, I understand. I don't want to be there either. And they don't want to be there either, but they are there. And they are dealing with the reality of life and death on a daily basis at one of the most vicious enemies you could possibly imagine. And you're contributing to that by saying Tehillim. They're there because of you, for you. Right? Hashem has put them there on your behalf. The least you can do is show appreciation for the fact that they're doing this by saying Tehillim on their behalf with as much kavanah as you can. It's just another 5-10 minutes of davening. So some inyanim do better than others, but this this is what creates crises for Klal Yisrael. It's almost as if Akash Baruch Hu says, if you're not going to appreciate the fact that I'm saving you from having to go do things like this, you have to find it for yourself. And that's been Klal Yisrael all through history. With the base of Mikdash, and as Hashem sent Nevi'im to tell us what was going to happen if we didn't change our ways and maintain that appreciation of what we had. We didn't listen to Nevi'im, who spoke on behalf of God. On the contrary, there are false prophets, and we listen to them instead. That's all okay. The way you're doing it, it's fine. Boom. Basically, this is destroyed. The Jewish people are exiled. We just finished Purim, Megillah Esther. Same thing. All over again. Crisis. Genocide potential. We have to fast for 3 days. We have to daven for 3 days. Because there's a Haman in the world that Hashem has put there for the sake of making it to tshuva. And that's what the Gemara says. Right? The Gemara says Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua, but it's all part of the introduction, by the way. The Machlokas in the Gemara in Sanhedrin on Tzadi Zayin Amud Beis. Rabbi Elazar says that all the Ketzim, all the times for Mashiach to come, have come and gone. Mashiach hasn't come. Actually, that's the first opinion. Then the argument goes on, and he says if the Jewish people do tshuva and maisim tovim, they do the tshuva and they do the good acts, the Torah mitzvahs, Mashiach will come. If they don't, he's not going to come. And Rabbi Yeshua says, well, Chas v'Chalil, he's not going to come. Of course he's going to come. Rather, he's not. That's the only part he's really arguing. He agrees also that tshuva, ma'asim tovim are necessary. He says, rather, instead of Kadosh Baruch Hu, we'll raise up a king. We'll raise up a king who'll be gozer gezeras like Haman, and then the Jewish people will be compelled to do tshuva ma'asim tovim. Why do we have to get to a point like that? Now, maybe there's nothing to change. Maybe that's just the way God wants it to be. He talks and he acts like it can be some other way, and he gives us a Torah mitzvahs and says, "Here, I gave it to you, so go do it." But there's historical process, and there's all kinds of things, and we spoke about the different levels of hashgacha pratis and how mysterious and non-understandable that they actually are, right? And maybe that, but here we are, right, in 5784, 2024. In a situation that we thought would not happen again in our lifetime. We'd hoped it wouldn't happen again in our lifetime, but it has. And the direction of history is not going the way we would like it to go, because we were having a good life. It was exile, but it was a good exile, meaning you could learn Torah, you could do kiruv, outreach, right? You could have tons of shuls, Baruch Hashem, and batim midrashos, and not just a beit knesset or a beit medrash, but you could even have finely decorated, beautifully done. I mean, coveted Torah, absolutely wonderful, and it helps the learning. Personally, I find it helps to be nice at base medrash. There's some places I just was such a nice thing. That was everybody. Right, but Rav Yaakov Weinberg once told us that when he was in yeshiva, none of that stuff mattered. It had 4 walls, a roof. That was all you needed, And for breakfast, they had potatoes and onion, and for lunch, they had onions and potatoes, and for supper, if you're lucky, you had potatoes, onions and potatoes again. right? And that's it. No carpet, no air conditioning, no, barely a fan, maybe even in the summertime. And you learned, right? But that's not a generation today. That's not where we are holding today. But all of that has made it very, very comfortable to be in exile, and that's a problem. That's a problem because you have to realize that you might be enjoying it, but God's not. The Shekhinah is not. It's like a parent, for example, right, who's watching their son succeed in business and do very well. At the same time, their business is going down. They're losing money. The tax department is on their case, and they have constant pressure. And every day they have to worry about how they're going to pay the next bill. But their son is doing great, so they're happy for their son, 100%. It's hard to be happy for their success if you yourself are suffering and the Shekhinah is suffering. Because until we can fulfill that verse by Yamahu Yeshem Echad Shmo Echad, that God will be one in the whole world will wake up and realize and acknowledge that God is the king of the entire world and never doubt his Ashkacha Pratis again. That means a Beis Hamikdash. That means a temple built as per specification on the Temple Mount for the Jewish people, where the Shekhinah can dwell and the nations of the world can visit to worship God, the one true God, the God of the Jewish people, the God of the Torah, God who made creation. Short of that, it's pain for the Shekhinah. So redemption is the only way to get there. So in order to go from where we are today to there, something has to happen. So it could happen through us. We can make a decision and say, something, we need to teach the world differently. We need to focus on what counts the most. It's like the same thing. For decades, we did our own thing, the Torah world, and the secular world wanted nothing to do with us, and they did their own thing. And the two did not really, come together very often until they did. And we had to go into politics to try and fight the battles there in the Knesset, and start struggling for money and finance. The history is a little muddled, but if you go back and you see how the transformation takes place, but it was late, very, very late in the process when someone woke up and said, maybe we should have instead focused on trying to make them understand how valuable Torah actually is. Back at the beginning. Okay, so you couldn't talk to Ben Gurion, you couldn't talk to Weiss necessarily, you couldn't talk to the leaders who were trying to impress the rest of the world and fit in with the rest of the world, mostly and were communists by background from Russia and all that, didn't want to know from God. They don't put them in the Constitution. This is in the American Constitution, it's not the Israeli Constitution. Right? That's how far. But the people themselves, they have backgrounds, their traditions. Maybe we should have reached out back at the beginning, and that in the case, then maybe it wouldn't be the way it is today. We don't know. Speculation. But here we are. That's where we are. And this is the situation. And we can argue the point as much as we want and deliberate on what the causes were, the effects, but here's where we are. And the situation is becoming more difficult each and every passing day. They're pushing for a new election in Israel. The left, they kept their mouths shut for a little bit of time only because there was a war going on and they were afraid to speak up at that time because everyone was focused on Achdus, but they're back. Not everybody. It's like an apple tree. You want to see which apples are ready ripe for picking? You shake the tree first, and the ones that are really ripe, they fall off on their own. The rest you have to pick for yourself. So, there are people who were at a point in their life where the right push could make them change in the right direction. And that happened to a lot of people. The stories are floating all around about people who, because of what happened on October 7th, remarkably, and sometimes even miraculously, have moved towards the direction of God and Torah. Absolutely fantastic. But a lot of people didn't. They don't want to. They're not interested right now. And they're preparing, the battle. It's going to get messy. It's going to get nasty, as it has before in the past. As it did in the time of the Greeks with the Misyavnim, as we had the Karayim. We have a history. You go back to Chumash and Korach, right? And he was from at that time. But he came from another side. And Moshe came from another side. And there was a battle. But Moshe had at his fingertips fantastically obvious miracles that deal with the situation because he was in touch with God personally. We don't have exactly that today, but nonetheless, God does run the world, and he will make what has to happen to happen. The bottom line to all of this is that I realized you just can't go forward anymore the same way. We can't simply, take it day by day where, let's see what happens next. Let's see where things are going to happen, where they're going to go from this point. History that we have known, that we grew up with, okay, for the last 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever decades, since World War II ended, right? It's over. It always ends anyhow around, around 60, 70, some odd years later. The Gemara also talks about this type of trend. The business world talks about, trends and cycles like this too. But you have to understand that the world that we've known to get us here, it was great and it was important. And it was hashgacha pratis, but it was to get us to this point. It was never meant to go on forever. Beryl Wine talks about in one of his tapes from years ago when he was a rav in I think, Muncie at the time, and the shul had to decide they had decided already to replace the skylight in the shul. And they brought a professional in who sells these things. And he sat down with them and he said, do you want the one that lasts 100 years? Or do you want the one that lasts 200 years? And he said, I'm listening to this discussion about whether they should invest in the more expensive one. And then I was like, what are you talking about here? 100 years, 20 years? Hopefully we won't even be here for another 20 years. 10 years. Hopefully shul will come. But what are we talking about? You plan to have the shul here for hundreds of years? It's not going to happen. Forget it. And this is the mentality. And it's changed. It's Akash Baruch who's changing it. He's changing it. The situation day by day. You cannot judge what's going on today by people's reactions to it only. The fact that people, you ask them, how's it going? Fine. What's it like there in America? That's fine. Yeah. Listen, I agree. Someone just told me yesterday how, he has a friend. He lives here. He learns with this person. The guy lives in England. A very hard sell about what's happening and the need to get out of England and move to Israel. For years, he's been trying to. Now the guy just wouldn't listen. They would learn together, but not that. And he just told me that recently, when the U.S. voted, for the two-state solution, it was Russia and China that vetoed it in the end. Talk about strange coincidences or strange events, no coincidence, but events taking place. He saw how America could turn on Israel like that. He told my friend, he said, remember we spoke about this thing, send me the sources. I want to start looking to this more. Moved a bit more. And there's more people like that who they see it, but it's a complicated and very difficult thing to get to a point where you realize, let's get out. And I realize we could stay longer, but if we stay longer, what are the chances we can't get out? So let's go now. And for the last 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 200 years, Jews have been getting out, and mostly on their own terms, because they made the decision while they could still make that decision. But nonetheless, it's very hard for people to accept, just like it was in the 1930s. It was you have to go back there. You can't just look at the Holocaust and the war and say, well, it was different. They were Nazis. You have to understand that people stayed in Germany who could have got out, and Europe, because they thought that anti-Semitism that we're used to from the Middle Ages and the pogroms and all that was never going to come back again. They didn't understand the Holocaust could still happen. We don't know what's coming up in history. It's outside of, just think, we can't predict where the world's going to go and how bad the situation can get, but we know that man is man. He's capable of all. Look at the hatred that's surfacing against Israel and the Jewish people. It's completely illogical. Okay, it's Palestinian driven, but what difference does it make? So that was Nazi driven. That was Hitler driven. But it still spread. It still resulted in Jews in concentration camps and being murdered, whatever the cause. God's got many things, many ways to carry out his plan. So you can't just judge by people's reaction. They're slow. They don't acknowledge, they're not real with the picture. You have to look at the situation. You have to look at Jewish history mostly and see how, when this happens, it's the same thing. You get symptoms The first time you catch a cold, maybe you don't know. You're very young, whatever. But after years, you can tell the difference between allergies and colds and viruses. They have different effects. You start to feel a little scratchy feeling. That's got to be a sinus headache. It's going to be like you start to recognize the signs because of the past, because it's a pattern to health. And the same is true of history. And here's that pattern all over again. So, you want to wait to see how it plays out to know. You need a strategy now. We have to figure out what it is that we have to know in order to first is to maintain our sanity, to be able to rise above it, because that's really the bottom line. We see that's possible. The Gemara talks about this. We've mentioned it many times before. The Zohar makes promises, and the Zohar is Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, and he lived with the Romans, and he had to run away from them. So he knows what danger to life is all about. He lived in the time the temple was destroyed. He knows. He's not making it up. He understands. Right? And he talks about certain things you can do to mitigate the effects of Gog and Magog and Chavei Mashiach. The Gemara makes a phenomenal promise that I don't understand why people who don't take it seriously. The Gemara says anybody who's Shalosh Sudos, right, the 3 meals on Shabbos, will be spared Din of Gehenna, Chavei Mashiach, and the war of Gog and Magog, which is really doing the same thing there, but one can happen one before the other actually full blown. That's a phenomenal promise the Gemara is making. Is it true? Is it just an exaggeration? I mean, people must think it's an exaggeration because there's lots of people who don't have Suda Shlishis. In fact, it's such a halacha to have all 3 meals. It's one of the few places you find in the Shulchan Aruch, which does not bring down philosophy very often, just mostly technical halacha. And it says that there's no such thing as I can't eat Suda Shlishis because I ate too much for lunch and I'm still full, especially on winter days. Why not? Because a chacham, a nava rishon, a wise man thinks ahead. He plans for it. He knows I need to have 3 meals today. How much can I have at lunch that I can still have an appetite for Suda Shlishis? Because I need to have that meal. Just the mitzvah alone should make you want to do that. But the Gemara promises that if you have all 3 meals, you will be protected from these things. What does that mean? And just anybody, just by having the food? And why dafka these 3 meals? We'll have to talk about that. It's a chapter called the Shabbos Protection Program. Something about Shabbos specifically, we'll see that if you do it right, the proper way, and you understand what you're doing, you actually can rise above what's going on in the world around you and be spared. Just a sneak preview. We'll come back to this idea. But think about it for a second. Yaakov and Esav are about to have their final confrontation. And Yaakov is so worried about it because he didn't do the mitzvah of kibbutz avim for 22 years. And Esav did whatever he did, right? But in his humility, Yaakov worries about it. And he's worried about war. So he does 3 things, right? The first thing he does, he sends gifts to the enemy to try to soften his heart, that he won't be so angry. The second thing he does is he divides the camp. In case we have to go to war, one side can run away. I don't know how fast or how far, but it's a practice. You have to do something. So he doesn't pray. God should protect him from whatever's going to happen next, okay? That's what he does. Clearly, Yaakov, before you point out, in the end, most of it was necessary. Most of it they didn't have to do because in the end, no war. And that's why they all come together in the end. They don't meet in separate 2 different camps. They come as one camp because Yaakov realizes that it's not going to result in war. But it's not entirely true. In fact, Asa did come to kill Yaakov. Medrash says this. Bereishis Rabbah says it's partly brought down in Rashi too, but the whole Medrash is not brought down. And it's important. It says that they came, Esav ran to Yaakov, and he embraced him, and they wept. Rabbi Yanai says the reason why they wept was that actually came to bite into the neck of Yaakov and kill him. Talk about animalistic. That's what he wanted to do. But Hashem did a miracle and turned Yaakov's neck into marble, which must have been hard to swallow, but that's what did, Moshe like Pharaoh as well, and or later on in the future. And as a result of that, Esav bit into him and broke his teeth. Yaakov is so grateful that this is not going to pan out the way Esav planned. Esav is crying because it's going to cost him a fortune in dental work. He's saved from his enemy. So from what, even though Chazal say that we learn from Yaakov how to prepare for battle by the three things he did, in the end, those were the things that saved him. What did save Yaakov? Just that Hashem did a miracle for him? So there's a part of this whole discussion that's very Shabbos oriented, and we'll get back to B'ezras Hashem, but it gives you an idea, a strategy for the end of days. Because it turns out that there was a short dialogue. Yaakov sends the gifts to Esav, and Esav says, no, I don't need them. I have plenty, my brother, he says. I have plenty. I don't need your gifts. I'm wealthy as much as I need to be. He takes the gifts because Yaakov implores him to. He, kinds of forces him on. He says, Yeshli Rav. That's what Esav says. Yeshli Rav. I have a lot. And Yaakov says, Yeshli Kol. I have everything. So, first of all, how can you make a statement like that? Maybe at this moment you do, but what if you get a bill tomorrow? What happens if you need a plumber to come fix something, right? And you need the money and you gave it away yesterday. Right now you do. but what about the future? How can Yaakov make such a statement like that? So Rashi says that Esav spoke derech gaiva, and Yaakov spoke, more like with derech bitachon emunah. He was really saying, I have everything because I have God. Because as long as I'm doing what God wants me to do, I can rest assured he'll give me whatever I need and he'll protect me. Yaakov explained to Esav his approach to the physical world. It really comes down to the same idea. Whether you make a bracha to eat or you eat to make a bracha. So for Esav, it's pashut. You make a bracha to eat. I want to eat. Eating is the main thing over here. Oh, God said, or at least the rabbis came along and said you should make a bracha before you do it. Fine, okay. He's not making brachas, but theoretically. And Yaakov says, no. The only reason why food makes a difference is because it creates a scenario, a situation that allows me to bless Hashem, to thank him for what I have. And that's what I'm here for. That's the whole point. That's Yaakov. What we see here is a confrontation of two realities. Esav and Yaakov's. But really, it's all through mankind. Going back to Noah's time, before that, all two approaches to life. Whether materialism is a goal unto itself, or the only meaning the materialism has is how it facilitates a mitzvah, allows me to sanctify the name of God. Turns out that that's a Shabbos mentality. And we won't do it today. We'll come back to that B'ezras Hashem, probably next week, to see how that's really what the Gemara is talking about anyone who keeps Shabbos properly, and anybody who eats Suda Shlishis. It's deeper than most people understand and than most people live. So B'ezras Hashem, we will talk about that, God willing, next week, a little bit later, because the clocks will change in Eretz Yisrael, and we'll post the time next week. So have a great Shabbos, a peaceful Shabbos, and only B'soros Tevis all Klal Yisrael.